Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be talking with comics creator and educator Justin Zimmerman. Justin, thank you for jumping in, joining, and talking with me for a few minutes.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we have to come up with.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are a couple of notable works that I'll mention here at the beginning. I usually like to just mention a few titles, and then, of course, we can go into other directions as you'd like. But of course, the 27 run being one of those. The Killing Jar, I know that goes back a bit.
Yeah, we'll be chatting about some of the work with BattleQuest Comics and our free comic book day offering, and would be remiss not to mention Peaches and his brother Little T, who you might see kind of waltzing their way through
Hmm
this as
hmm
we go. We just adopted them not too long ago, so they're part of the team over here as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. All creatures are welcome, great and small. So wonderful. Well, curious by means of a sort of origins question, what drew you to comics? What made you know that this was the space where you wanted to share ideas and create?
Yeah, I got my master's degree in film about 20 years ago, and I have kind of split my time between making films, being a professor and teaching, and then working for companies. So I had a long stint with Cisco Systems and Getty Images, and have kind of woven all of these experiences together to find my way into a real first love, which is comics. I remember when I was sick when I was a kid, my dad bringing home those little packages from the store,
Yeah.
with some titles and just loving the form. I've written about this before, but finding ElfQuest in my local library when there was no comic section, when there were not any comic stores, like finding that first graphic novel, that collection, and just being completely blown away by the art and the story and the world. Um, and and really in a lot of ways finding escape and solace through that form. And then I did finally a local comic book store opened and they saw that I was punching way above my weight. And as a pretty young person, getting Sandman Season of Mists and Arkham Asylum and Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, and just seeing that
Mhm.
there's a world out there of graphic storytelling that just, book after book just blew my mind. So I've always loved and appreciated comics. As an educator, it is the only realm in which young literacy seems to be like holding steady, if not growing.
Mhm, mhm.
So the idea that words and pictures can come together to actually help younger folks learn is also very exciting to me. And I guess there's something very free about comics because in a lot of ways it's still, I think, thought about as a trash medium, as a kids thing, as something superfluous. And what's
Mhm.
great about being labeled in that way is that you can get away with just about anything.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
as a diverse form of storytelling and to look at the diverse and incredible number of stories and creators that I've just seen in the last couple of years is pretty breathtaking to me. We'll talk about the business of all of that, I'm sure, in a little bit, but just in terms of the form, um, I think it's as exciting to me, if not more exciting than film in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of smiling when you were talking about that origin story being sick and parents bringing you comics because that was also part of how I found the medium. I was sick, about 7 years old, and my parents bought me a stack of comics, and it's like that's the connection right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's just something remarkable about sharing something with others, and I know collectability has so taken over, but reading a story, giving it to somebody else, trading, and just kind of being enveloped in that was something that I grew up with and really appreciate.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm a person that does writing and editing as well. So I'm always curious about sort of, you mentioned the business, the relationships of moving from editor to writer and kind of thinking through those different roles. So curious about what that's been like and sort of how one is informed the other, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I
And we
mean, for
could
me,
throw educator in there too, as well, actually.
Yeah, it all kind of swirls around. I mean, for sure, I've always just loved making things. It's just a huge part of my personality and a huge part of my being. And so, you know, I had stories that were going to be impossible to film, and I started thinking about how much I love comics, and so I started writing comics. And what I did was I did the worst thing you can possibly do, which is I wrote a giant graphic novel, and I worked with a single artist. This was The Killing Jar over a
Mhm.
long period of time. It's like 220 pages or something. It was bonkers. And but while I was smart enough while I was doing that to start writing short stories and then hiring younger or less known artists in or around the Portland area. And so that was a series that I called Other Worlds. So I had Other Worlds in the Killing Jar, and I would go to the local conventions and I would learn how to, I learned how to letter. I had a technology background through film, but obviously print is a completely different animal.
Mhm.
So, I did a lot of experiential learning, but I read a lot and I talked to a lot of people and I just started making these comics. And I was fortunate enough that the Killing Jar um, had one of the, I think, a very early Kickstarter success. And I printed that locally and sustainably. And then that eventually got published, which was pretty exciting and optioned. Nothing was filmed based on that option, but it's been optioned twice, which is pretty cool. And then
Mhm.
Other Worlds kind of, writing for all these different artists, learning about what was working and what wasn't, learning about schedules and benchmarks and timelines and putting something out. Like that was my crash course. And I always finished what I started, and I always published what I did so that I could get feedback and learn from it and move forward from there. And it eventually just got to the point where I was making enough comics and that I started getting published. And
Mhm.
then after I started getting published, publishers realized that I had this huge organizational communication background, a technology background. I could work with a lot of different people. I could keep people on a schedule. I could keep people on a budget. And then I started getting hired very specifically for doing editing and publishing roles.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I know there are a lot of different ways to quote unquote get into comics, but that was mine, making things and then translating that experience into helping other people make things hopefully more successfully. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess the 27 run was this giant behemoth. Otherworlds was long out of print, but I mean, I still love those babies, those stories. You still love your children, and some
Yeah.
of them I think were pretty spectacular. And then I started working on a series called and then a number of anthology stories too, which I think that's a great way to get into comics. If you can't do a 2 page or an 8 page or 10 page at the most for an anthology story, then you're never going to be able to do anything that's bigger than that. So I really believe in anthologies to this day. But then the 27 run series, which is pretty exciting because the first 3 issues of that, the 27 run Crash, come out through Battle Quest Comics at the beginning of next year. The sequel Crush will come out the following year, and I'm already working with. We'll get back to this, but my team from our Free Comic Book Day issue, Sid and Carlos and Pete and Brian Hawkins again on editing. This is my team that will be doing the third and final book in the trilogy.
Oh,
So
nice,
I guess the
nice.
other thing is in this wide-ranging conversation is that you create relationships and you grow to trust and care about people. Hopefully that's the bedrock of the creative process. And I've worked with people in the film world now for 15 or 20 years. I would never do a project without them. If, I will invite them to every project. And on the comic book world, I'm working with people I worked with from the very beginning, which now is like 12 or 13 years. And so I'm always bringing in new voices. I'm always looking to make new connections. I always love giving people an opportunity to shine. But if you can trust and rely on somebody, well, that's a relationship you never want to leave behind.
Yeah. Any particular folks you'd like to kind of shout out as being particularly supportive of the journey, strong collaborators? Not to say that those that you don't mention aren't, but just curious if there are any of those relationships that you'd like to mention.
Or just in general, I mean, if you look at any of my books, if you look at any of the record of my work, you'll just see kind of continued names popping up, both in the film and the comic book world. And it's not that they don't know that I mean, they know I love them and I care about them and I appreciate them, but it would be the rest of the show because we're also talking
Right.
about editors and we're also talking about colorists and we're also talking about flatters that don't get any kind of major recognition. Um, there are so many people who put together a comic book. Um, and just in general, if you're a younger creator or a newer creator, don't forget that it is, no matter how alone you think you are, it's always a team effort.
Mhm.
And people, if you are a good person and you are a great collaborator, um, hopefully being a good person is the basis of being a great collaborator. But if you're a great collaborator, people will trust you and rely on you forever.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned creating these sort of sprawling worlds, behemoth books, 200 pages plus. What's it like to dig in? Do you have any particular approaches when you're building a world like that that's so expansive?
Yeah, I mean, I am a process-driven individual, and so for me, I really, really appreciate kind of building as much as possible with your team at the beginning.
Hmm.
I mean, that's why I'm great at writing horror. All I do is think about worst case scenarios, and then you just go from there. Like
Right.
I try and think of all the worst case scenarios and cut them off as much as possible. And the best way to cut off worst case scenarios is communication preparation, just in general.
Hmm.
So I challenge myself when I write all the time. I write very differently based on the project. Some I try to find on the page and throw caution to the wind and build as I go and have a sense of chaos and anarchy to that. Other things I will plot out to the nth degree. But what I never skimp on is making sure that the people I'm working with, I always make sure that they have whatever tools and information they need to do their job well. So you build from the ground up. I'm
Yeah.
also a big believer in contracts.
Hmm.
And, it's something that it's not very exciting for a lot of people to talk about. But, I've been in, the last college I taught at, they brought me in to teach creating comics because that's not there really aren't departments about that in most higher education scenarios. I mean, it's such a new thing, working with a library to make sure that the library is up to speed on all the kind of great things that are happening. Um, Building a syllabus around one course to three courses to whatnot, helping really get an understanding of the medium. But when you're teaching a creating comics course, you're going to get students from a bunch of different backgrounds. I had a student, an incredible student, so talented, who was a senior and graduating, and she was like, Professor Zimmerman, or maybe just Justin, because I dislike being called Professor Zimmerman. But long story short, Professor Zimmerman, what do you do if someone asks you to hire you? I was like, nobody has talked to you about this. No one has talked to you about a work for hire
Hmm.
contract or creator, co-creator, creator owned. No one's talked to you about what your roles and responsibilities are in being hired at any level. Like, no, it just wasn't part of the conversation, which is terrifying to me because a contract is again the basis for the agreement as to what people are going to work on and what they're going to deliver. Essential. Um, well, my answer to that, besides start looking up work for hire contracts and if you're in the entertainment world, consider looking into what an entertainment lawyer. I mean, there are books about this stuff in the comic book world and the film world, but they're startups. But I said, ask them what their budget and their timeline is. 99% of them will never talk to you again, and that's great because they just saved you a lot of time and a lot of heartache.
Mm.
But
True, true, true.
long story short, to me, that's part of your role when you're building a project or working for a company is making sure that the roles and responsibilities are defined. There is some kind of contract so that everybody agrees on what's happening next.
Hmm.
and that you are giving your collaborators the tools that they need to do their jobs uh, the best that they can.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate to read the creator stories where people sign on for a project and then the deadlines move up or the things are not as clear, the details are not as clear, and so suddenly they're having to change pages. And some of my favorite comic books, I read the stories behind them, and I'm like, I have that empathy for the creators because sometimes they don't come together with the same positivity on the other end of the creative spectrum.
It's it is a creativity is a messy word no matter what realm you're in.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I could conservatively go on this for the next 6 hours, but much like film, comics as a business seems to be a lot of it's predicated on lies and deceit. The idea of someone doing you a favor, there's a lack of transparency on rates. There's no real HR for a huge number of situations. You see a real lack of any kind of organizational structure at any level.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and when you're part of a world where people love comics, they love films, they want to be part of it, but they
Hmm.
don't know how, and no one there are the resources, no one's telling you, like that is very confusing. You don't if I wanted to become an electrical engineer, there would be a pathway for me to achieve that. If I want to get into comics, it's a crazy world. And then you have people who are comic book famous or they've made it in comics and they're taken advantage of, or you see didn't get paid, or
Hmm.
their book was optioned and they didn't get any money from it while other people did, or their book was slated to come out from a publisher and it didn't because the publisher disappeared, or
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking. And I remember early on, um, I was having a meal with an incredible creator at New York Comic Con or San Diego Comic Con, one of these, and they told me they were like, you got to stay up till 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning at the bars because that's where all the that's where the business, that's where the real business and all the meetings and all the stuff gets done. And
Hmm.
it horrified me. Like what industry has the major, I mean, again, I work for Cisco Systems and Getty Images, and every college I've ever worked at I was a caseworker. We had state and federal background checks and FBI trainings, and no one ever was like, "Let's go hang out at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, and we'll make this deal. We'll cinch this business decision up."
Yeah. Yeah.
That that entire um, that entire model is nothing but a avenue for people to take advantage of each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's frankly terrifying to me. And I'm sure that's not what you really wanted to get into with me, but I will say in general, as a creator, as an editor, as someone who works for, a company, I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure that transparency, communication, and uh, a real system of values sustains.
Yeah.
And I know so many people in the industry who love and believe the industry, but are kind of trapped in circumstance. And I think I feel fortunate that I came into comics from a very different way, and that's given me the ability to maybe work in a different way. And I try to keep that spirit in all of my interactions and all of my communications.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in terms of where we've gone in the conversation, that's absolutely fine. We follow the conversation as it goes, so that works well. And valuable insights for people to listen to. I'm just thinking about how fortunate your students are to have somebody that can speak to the creative sort of avenue side as well as the business side, because you clearly have both of those things in focus.
I think that it's important. So being from film and being a director, I don't want to do everybody else's job for them. In
Hmm.
fact, you
Hmm.
work with people who are better than you because that's how you make something great.
Hmm.
But I want to know at least how to do each of their jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's really served me well in the comic book world because I have been through all the process of creation, getting published, et cetera, et cetera, and then can turn around as an editor and help people shape their work. As someone who works for a publisher, to really advocate for solid page rates, for thoughtful turnaround times, for real communication when it comes to the launch of a book,
Hmm.
um, um, and that's all very important to me just personally.
Yeah. Do you, as a creator, do you kind of think about those connections between film and comics as you're working across media, or do you sort of kind of switch? Is there a switch that occurs for you there?
Yeah, I mean it's there are so many things that are in common. I mean, most to me is the script writing process. It's action and dialogue, and anything else you want to kind of stay away from. But I have a ton of documentary work, and even my documentaries can be wildly different in how they're formed, or do you have people looking at the camera, or do you have any kind of talking heads at all versus when's music used or when's music's not used? Um, there are so many ways in which to develop a project that I really do feel like while they have lots in common, and I write very visual scripts, and I actually use a lot of cinematography language when I write scripts, they are absolutely different animals. And
Hmm.
I think one of my big issues with a lot of comics is they feel like they're spec, like they were a spec script that then got turned into a four-part series, and that never works. I mean, even when I was a kid, I got the, it was 1989. I had like the greatest Batman birthday party. I have pictures of me with all the Batman stuff all over me. But you read those movie kind of takes in the graphic novel form, and they like fit a movie into 64 pages, and you're like, this does not work. But even if you give yourself another issue or two, it's impossible to get that all the nuances of a feature script into even a 4 or 5 part series. And weirdly, that's where a lot of comic books have gone
Hmm.
because people seem less excited about making comics and even publishing comics than they do in collecting as much IP as possible and kind of putting that into their library. And
Yeah.
that's kind of a generality, but you do sense that once comic book movies became big business, comic books became less about comics, which are disposable, stapled, awesome, independent, monthly, just bombast, and more into here is a logo, a pitch.
Hmm.
Look, we did the storyboards for you. We have 50 of these. Let's get into business together. That's not really where great storytelling comes from, but it is the world in which we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, as you're telling stories, any particular threads, any particular values that you like to make sure that you include in the work to reach to that quality that you enjoy?
I am always looking for authenticity when it comes to performance in film or television. I don't care what the genre is.
Hmm.
For comics, I'd say character. I always want to kind of follow characters first through whatever it is that they're going through. And I think a lot of people are limited by the fact that they're always looking for one thing. But it is comics are as diverse as the people who are making them, and we live in a diverse world, and that's really exciting. And you can move from one thing to the next thing. It seems like to me, and maybe this is just me, but people seem to be, at least in the vocal comic book world, very siloed.
Hmm.
I watched Fallout and then Shogun the last couple weeks. There cannot be more wildly different storytelling uh, in the history of television,
Hmm.
but both of them are astounding. But a lot of people don't move from their Fallouts to their Shoguns in the comic book world, it seems. And so to me, I always try to keep myself open to the challenges of different kinds of storytelling and stories. But yeah, if you have a great character and an interesting, scenario, dilemma, conflict, like I'm in. I'm there.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I wanted to ask about the creative vision. I know you have Free Comic Book Day coming up. So curious about, well, we all have Free Comic Book Day coming up, but you have a particular project that's coming that day. So curious about the next steps for you and where you'd like to head in the creative journey.
I'm pretty excited. For the last 2 years, I've been the media director for BattleQuest Comics here in Portland. It's a family-owned comic company. Um, it's either owned by the owners of the company or it's creator-owned. And
Mhm.
so I'm one of a few creator-owned kind of projects coming out through BattleQuest Comics. And it's just been incredible to be part of this journey. The signed with Diamond a couple of years ago. First book came out less than 2 years ago. We're part of FOC for the comic book savvy folks out there. The final order cutoff, starting with the Young Nomads in October.
Mhm.
And with a company like this, if you have kind of a cool idea or a different way to work in the world of direct distribution, we can do it. And because I have a ton of experience working with comic book stores, which I adore, working with Comics Pro, which I also love, we're doing something really spectacular this year, which is we made from scratch a one-shot comic, again with the team that's going to follow me into the third and final 27 run series. And this we shipped out to hundreds of our retail store partners for free on our own time and our own dime. I think it's 7,500 copies of this book, maybe more.
Wow.
So I'll be signing at Cosmic Monkey Comics right here in Portland, on Free Comic Book Day, and some of the team is also going to be signing at Excalibur Comics also here in Portland. And it's just such a a neat thing to kind of be a part of and to have been able to put together. This is the third year, I think, in a row that we've sent out free comics to our partner stores, but this is the first time we've done something completely and totally from scratch. And it's killer. It's awesome. Sid and Carlos nailed it. He did an extraordinary job. Um, it's I'm very, very proud of it, as you can probably tell. And I'm excited to share it with other people. And it's part of our kind of commitment to the wider world of readership too. We sponsor the Boise Comics Arts Festival, which is a 2-day free library driven a comic book convention in Boise.
Mhm.
We're doing an incentive program where we have killer AAA artists doing covers for our first issues. And if a comic book store orders 5 copies, they get one of these incentive covers for free.
Nice.
And Bill Sienkiewicz, Barry Kitson, Robbie Rodriguez, Jorge Corona, and Morgan Deem. It's killer stuff. Brent Anderson was our first one. So it's just been so great, working with BattleQuest and bringing, I think, a lot of the love and joy of comic books and reading, not only to the traditional reader, but also to comic book stores. And on that kind of collectability front, getting these killer versions of our first issues for free. So yeah, I'm psyched about Free Comic Book Day. I'm psyched to be signing with my friends at Cosmic Monkey Comics, and I'm psyched about what's going to be coming up for the rest of the year.
Awesome, awesome. Well, any particular spaces, online, publisher site, things like that, where people can go and check out what you're creating and kind of follow along?
Yeah, so battlequestcomics.com, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on with that company. And for me and for my work on the visual front and the writing front, uh, brickerdown.com is my production site. Or if that's too complicated, just Google Justin Zimmerman film and you'll probably be there pretty fast. But yeah, there's a reel of my work for the last 20 years and then a whole bunch of films that are free on my YouTube site. We're on Amazon Prime and films on iTunes, and it's just a neat world where you can make and you can create, you can get out into the world, and then you move on to the next thing. You build a record of work, and that's
Mhm.
something that I always want my students to think about is it's important to love what it is that you're working on. It's equally important to finish it
Mhm.
and to let it go and to be quiet and let other people tell you what they think about it, and then to move on to the next thing. You're building, and I would always want to be building.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings me to, where do you teach in case folks out there want to potentially work with you in that way at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I work full time for BattleQuest Comics, so teaching I really is for the love of teaching. Most recently, on the college world, I taught at Pacific University. I've also taught through the Portland Art Museum, the Creating Comics. For the last 3 years, I've served as the guest artist for the video cinema art students at the Denver School of the Arts.
Cool.
And so that's been really incredible working one-on-one and with small groups, largely remotely, of course. All of these students are making their own films. They're all getting into film festivals across the world. And of course, many of them are going to undergraduate film programs from NYU to, Chapman to fill in the blank. So um, I I believe in teaching and education, and I mean that's why I was excited to do this because if my experience can in some way help someone get into this realm or to learn a little bit more about it, then that brings me some joy.
Well, I appreciate that so much, and glad to share your words, glad to share your perspectives and experiences and insights. And I appreciate the time. I appreciate the creating that you're out there doing as well. So glad to have you back anytime to talk about comics, film, teaching, or any combination thereof.
That's amazing. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.